Imagine you are an ambitious artist living in 17th century the Netherlands, but there's no wealthy Catholic church commissioning paintings and neither a royal court with some expensive taste for art. What do? Well, luckily there are quite some wealthy people around you, as this is the Dutch Golden Century when merchants made a lot of money from trading goods from abroad. Some people decided to paint landscapes, or floral still lifes, or scenes from everyday life, all new art genres that were developed by 17th century Dutch artists, as these types of paintings could hang in the houses of the upper class. These houses were not like big palaces though, but substantially smaller like the houses you can still see in Amsterdam today. Some artists could make a good living by painting these relatively small works for private enjoyment, but if you really wanted to make some money, there was the opportunity to become a portrait painter, which artists like Rembrandt and Frans Hals had done. But still, a single portrait would only earn you so much. So yet another new genre was developed, which were group portraits. And no, not a family portrait, but a portrait of some prestigious group of people. And few things in the Dutch Republic were more prestigious than being a member of so-called Militia companies, which were voluntary city guards, and the most famous painting of such a militia company is the Night Watch, painted in 1642 by Rembrandt. Only wealthy people were part of these militia companies, and the attractive aspect for the artist was that each member who wanted to be included in the painting had to pay. More money for people in a prominent position, less for those on the sides and background. While I give some background about the militia companies in the Netherlands, I will show various of their group portraits in chronological order. And you will notice how they started with very static group portraits in the 16th century, and over time the compositions became more dynamic, culminating in Rembrandt's Night Watch. Every decent city in the Dutch Republic had one or more militia companies, also known as the Civic Guard or Schutterij in Dutch. The idea was simple. They had to protect the city in times of an attack, or when there was a revolt or fire. A large city would have multiple civic guards, each protecting a specific neighborhood. For example, in 1642, when Rembrandt painted his Night Watch, the city of Amsterdam had some 150,000 people, and there were 20 different civic guards. The civic guards differed from each other by the weapons they used, which could be a bow, a crossbow, or a gun. These civic guards were quite necessary during periods of war, and with the oppression of the Spanish of current-day Belgium and the Netherlands, there were periods during which these guards were very important. However, during most of the 17th century, there was no war in many Dutch cities, and the civic guard played a more ceremonial role, and they loved to organize lavish banquets for themselves. About 3 out of 100 citizens were part of the civic guard, and the typical size of a militia company was about 120 members. The most prestigious positions in these guards were the officers. They were typically appointed by the local government, and it was seen as an honor to become an officer. The highest two in rank were the lieutenant, second in charge, and the captain. The civic guard members did not get paid for their work and even had to buy their own weapons and clothing. This meant that only richer people were part of the civic guard, and once you made it to the role of officer, you were likely to have a great professional career. In other words, being an officer was a great thing on your resume. The officers of a civic guard had their own building where they would meet and where banquets were held. And to decorate these buildings and to make sure that their voluntary efforts for the guard were eternalized, they liked to commission group portraits from local painters. And it worked, as for many of these group portraits, it has been documented who each member in the painting is. The guard members, however, had to pay for their group portraits from their own pockets, and the more prominent your position on the painting was, the more you would have to pay. This was usually not so much of a problem, as the richest typically held the most important roles in the guard. But there were also some officers who could not or did not want to pay, meaning that they were excluded from the painting. Looking at the night watch, we can clearly see that the two people in the front are the most important ones and that they would have to pay the most to Rembrandt. On the left for us is Captain Frans Banning-Kok, giving the signal for the Civic Guard to start marching. Not because there was some emergency or so, but just a trick of Rembrandt to create a more dynamic composition than most of the other group portraits you have seen so far. And that makes also sense as the officers here are dressed too fancy to actually get into action. And just to understand who this captain is, he came from a relatively poor immigrant family, but through hard work and marrying into the upper class, he had become one of the wealthiest and influential people in Amsterdam, and he would later serve several times as one of the mayors of the city. And the man next to the captain is Lieutenant Willem van Ruitenburg, dressed in a light costume, following the latest French fashion. A few other elements in the night watch are worth pointing out. Some very common in these Civic Guard portraits, others just funny elements added by Rembrandt. First, you can see a person on the right playing the drums. Then there is a person carrying the large flag of the Civic Guard. This was known as the ensign, and unlike the other officers, he was typically an attractive bachelor and younger than the others. There's also a young girl who clearly stands out. She's an interesting character, as her size indicates that she is a young girl, but her face looks much older. She's holding a dead chicken, and the claws are carefully painted, as these were a traditional symbol for the Civic Guard. And then there are many other interesting details like the dog and the boy on the left holding a drinking horn. Finally, the painting did initially not have a title, but an objective title would be Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Frans Banning-Kok. However, since 1797 it is known as the Night Watch. Not because the people here were only active during the night, they were also active during the day. But Rembrandt had a typical Baroque style, where he liked to capture scenes with relatively dark background colors, such that he could highlight specific characters, like the little girl and the captain and lieutenant of this guard. And on top of that, over time the varnish of this painting has darkened, and so it appears to be darker out there than it was in reality. Well, there is so much more to tell about this specific painting, but I wanted to introduce you in this video to the genre and concept of so-called Schutterstukken or Civic Guard group portraits. Of course, groups had been painted many times before this genre originated. Think for example about the Wedding at Cana by Paolo Veronese. But those were historical scenes instead of real group portraits modeled after specific people. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons to support the channel. And leave a comment down below with any thoughts or questions you may have. Thanks for watching.